We are in chapter 5 of part 6. The reader has before him the original record and the various theories, and must choose what seems most satisfactory to him. Or perhaps the real answer is something not on this list. I believe that 2 were healed, but that one, for some reason, was more conspicuous than the other, or afterward came to be well known to the apostles, and therefore the account of his cure alone is preserved by Mark and Luke. His story is simply this. He was sitting by the roadside, plying his business as a beggar, when he heard that in the vast procession of pilgrims, which was sweeping past him with its bustling noise, was the famous teacher and healer, Jesus of Nazareth. He began at once to cry out, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." Again, that son of figure of speech. It will now be perceived how at every step the Messianic spirit rises among the people. We should naturally expect this when we recollect that the church had set up a price upon the head of Jesus. Well, the Sanhedrin was actually anti-church, because they said, well, we worship God. We're not. And yet, he was publicly, deliberately, and with dignity, going up to the headquarters of his enemies after he had performed such miracles as made his friends feel that no enemies could crush him, when Bartimaeus made his cry, which was an acknowledgment of the messianic dignity of Jesus. Those nearest bade him keep his peace and make no disturbance. This injunction was not made, as so many think, to repress his acknowledgment of Jesus as the Messiah. The populace had not yet turned against Jesus. They rather sided with him, as against the ecclesiastical party. But as there seemed to be in the confluence of events a current of festivity, they did not choose to have the lofty gaieties of the joyous festivities, right, of the occasion, depressed by unmannerly cries of a beggar, but they could not repress Bartimaeus. The more they tried to silence him, the more he cried, "Son of David, have mercy on me." Now, in that culture, that was not that Jesus had the power to forgive like God or something like that. His voice reached the ear of Jesus, who stood still and said, "Call him." There is a touch of naturalness in the narrative. As soon as Jesus spoke complacently, those very men became very kind to the beggar they had just now rebuked, and said, "Be of good courage. Rise, he calls you." How success begets success. This little history is constantly reproduced in society. Men of such force of character as disturb the public are suppressed if possible. If they be persistent enough to begin to succeed, that same public takes great delight in assisting. As soon as Bartimaeus knew that Jesus called him, he rose, flung aside his loose and probably ragged garment, and leaping up, came to Jesus. Jesus said to him, "What will you that I should do to you?" He answered, "Rabboni, my master, that I might receive my sight." The contrast between the ambitious and foolish prayer of James and John and the humble and wise prayer of this beggar is striking. Even though he's naked now, he knew his greatest necessity. He was humble. He was believing. He acts the most needful thing. Jesus neither questions nor criticized him, but simply he said, "Go your way, your faith has healed you." It was a mere breath, a few words, and without touch. The sight came instantly back to Bartimaeus. Well, no matter where, you don't want to touch another man when he's naked. But notice how he said, it's your faith. See? Faith healing. But it's the difference between him healing and whatever. Because people have faith in all sorts of stuff, and it actually aids in their healing. So, it's better to believe and there's other ways we can look at it's better to believe in something than nothing at all. So it's not necessarily justifying what this guy has done, but the statement would naturally have dissociated him to a certain degree in the eyes of the crowd. It was enough. He left all and joined the procession going to Jericho. And then we have explanation of Luke 19 and Matthew 25. This permitting himself to be publicly hailed as the Messiah, being followed with a striking and sudden miracle openly performed before an immense multitude, excited the people into a great pitch, and they shouted praises to God on their way to Jericho. This is an illustration here of Jericho. The city of Jericho, the site of which is now occupied by a miserable village of huts, was a place of considerable historical and commercial importance. It was immediately opposite the spot in the Jordan which was crossed by the Israelites when they took possession of the promised land, which happened over more generations than previously thought. And wasn't Jericho kind of like the Troy of what we now call Israel? That was conquered repeatedly, and, there's drawing up quite a bit and some other stuff, but, well, not quite a bit, but a lot more often than just a one-off event. Here they found much spoils. It was situated in a beautiful plain. Its name, which signifies fragrance, indicates that it was in the midst of a growth of finest plants. In fact, there bloomed the palm tree and the balsam in the midst of a luxuriant and fragrant vegetable kingdom. It afterwards became the favorite residence of priests who loved its shades for contemplation, and of Roman officers whose presence was required by the richness of the neighborhood, and by its being on the road of travel and of trade from the east. Pilgrims from the Perea side of the Jordan came through Jericho on their way to Jerusalem. Among the residents of Jericho at the time of the visit of Jesus was Zacchaeus. He was a Jew. His Hebrew name, notwithstanding its Greek termination, shows that. The name is found in its Hebrew form in Ezra 2:9 and Nehemiah 7:14 and 2 Maccabees 10:19. And let us remember that the language wasn't called Hebrew at the time, but Aramea. Aleph, Resh, Meme, Yud, Aleph. That doesn't pronounce Hebrew, right? That's not how you spell Hebrew. But later on we call that biblical Hebrew. Anyways, he was an officer of the Roman Empire. Whether an actual farmer of the revenue, a publicanus, or only a comptroller who received what was collected by the praetors and then paid it over to the farmer general, we cannot tell. The Roman law provided that such farmer general should be a Roman knight, but Josephus says that sometimes Jews obtained the office, as was therefore possible in the case of Zacchaeus. At any rate, he had a lucrative place in the customs, and Jericho was an important post by the general reason of its situation, and the particular reason of there being a heavy tax on dates and balsam. This man desired to see Jesus. It is remarkable that as Jesus had achieved what his countrymen regarded as the bad reputation of being the friend of publicans, Zacchaeus, one of the very chief, had never beheld his person, and although he had repeatedly been in the neighborhood of Jericho, moved by curiosity, perhaps by still higher motives, as the subsequent history would justify us in supposing, he determined to put himself in a position to see the distinguished traveler as he passed. Zacchaeus was so short that he could not see because of the great crowd. His desire to behold Jesus conquered his sense of dignity, so he ran ahead of the crowd and climbed up into a sycamore tree. It is to be remembered that this is not like the tall, close, slender tree of our American river bottoms. In Palestine, it is a great tree with a large trunk and far-spreading arms, and planted near roads in the open places where several paths meet. The arms grow across the road, giving excellent opportunity for seeing one passing beneath. Hammocks are sometimes swung in them, and a score of girls and boys may be seen playing among the limbs of this ample tree. For description and a picture of this tree, see Thompson's Land and Book. And there are traditions about particular trees and stuff like this, which possibly there's doubt as to which tree there was, but in the Islamic world, those trees that were part of tradition to Muhammad were cut down because people were afraid that they were going to start treating the tree as a deity or something like that. And in modern times, even the Saudi kingdom has destroyed places associated with Muhammad because they don't want anybody visiting the historical sites. Because it's like, well, there's visitation and there's pilgrimage. They're actually different views in the Islamic world, but that this is just talking about that sort of tree. But anyways, there's a lot of sacred trees in particular, I guess, as the traditions go. There are some related to some of the Israelite prophets. I don't remember which ones, but or where exactly the tree is, But as Jesus passed and looked up, he saw Zacchaeus and somehow knew his name, and surprised him with a sudden address. Zacchaeus, make haste and come down, for today I must stay at your house. The freedom, the kindness, the cordiality of Jesus won Zacchaeus instantaneously. He almost fell from the tree, and with demonstrations of joy received Jesus as his guest. On the way to the house, there were some disaffected Jews who criticized this conduct. Uninvited, he had invited himself to become the guest of a sinner. Every man connected with the collection of the revenues was hateful in the eyes of the Jews, and if one of their own nation accepted such a post, he was regarded as specially despicable. It was said by someone in the crowd, "He is gone to be a guest with the man that is a sinner." Zacchaeus heard it, and knew that he was a sinner, and confessed. He stood in face of the crowd and said to Jesus, "See, Lord, the half of my possessions I give to the poor, and if I have taken anything from any man by extortion, I will restore him fourfold." There's something about that fourfold or twofold thing that has become sort of a standard of restitution. Like if a person steals, they return fourfold as penalty. There was something most honest, deliberate, and ready in this outspoken confession. According to the law, Numbers 5:6, a man who had wronged another and confessed it was to restore the stolen property and add 20% of its value. And this man knew that he had wronged others, but his quick calculation told him that he could give half his property to the poor, restore all his ill-gotten gains, and pay the injured party 300%, and yet have all he now cared to retain. Since he had now the transcendent honor of entertaining Jesus as a guest in his house, speaking both to Zacchaeus and of him, Jesus said, "This day has salvation come to this house, inasmuch as he is also a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man has come to seek and to save what was lost." It was a most noble and free act on the part of Jesus. He rose above caste and prejudice and political partisanship. His quick eye saw the good in Zacchaeus, a germ of sweet richness kept from its growth by the difficulties of his position and the prejudice of his people. Jesus suddenly so warmed it that it sprung at once into vigorous growth. Wide-hearted Jesus. Now, let us remember that politics is a mode. I don't care to argue about politics. Right and wrong can be important enough to disagree with people, but not, ooh, I like this political party, this candidate. No, I'm not a fan of anybody. Not celebrities. I'll voice my criticisms if they're, if it's best to voice such criticisms. We know nothing more of Zacchaeus positively. There is a tradition that he became a disciple of Peter and subsequently bishop of Caesarea, but there is no historical proof of this, so far as I'm aware. It may have been in the house of Zacchaeus, or just as they started, or soon after, that Jesus uttered the parable of the pounds in order to correct the perversely wrong views of his friends in the multitude, who, seeing they were approaching the holy city, now looked for the immediate inauguration of his messianic reign. This expectation of worldly display may have been kindled by the phrase, "The Son of Man is come to seek and save that which was lost." So the Shao Shunt, Zoroastrian sort of way. Not a vicarious thing, but here's an example, going through society, teaching and leaving an example that takes people from their lost state if they believe a conflict would come between Jesus and the church. Again, no, if Jesus was establishing a church and here's a bunch of monotheists, that would have been the conflict. And that Jesus would triumph and would set up the kingdom of God at once. This is the parable. Well, the Bhagavad Gita has the thing, the true social order, if it, the kingdom of God, as you call it, if that is degraded to a certain extent, it's brought back for those who are willing to accept it. It's not that another prophet come. If it's there, it's there. It's just how many people are going to accept themselves into the kingdom of God, you could say. Of course, in yoga, you got to actually adhere to the system, not just state your name. It's like, oh, I'm a yogi man. Like these people who think that hot yoga and other Western scams are actually yoga. Not in that language, right? Maybe in English. A certain nobleman went into a far country to receive for himself a kingdom and return, and having called 10 of his own slaves, he gave them 10 mina and said, "Trade till I come." But his citizens hated him and sent a message after him, saying, "We will not have this man to reign over us." And it was so on his return, having received the kingdom, that he commanded those slaves to whom he had given the money to be called to him, that he might know what they had gained by trading. Then came the first and said, "Lord, your mina has gained 10 mina." And he said to him, "Well, good slave, because you have been faithful in a very little, have authority over 10 cities. And the second came and said, "Lord, your mina has gained 5 mina." And he said to this man, "But you also were from 5 cities." And the other came and said, "Lord, behold your mina, which I have kept laid in a napkin. For I feared you, because you are an austere man. You take up what you did not lay down, and reap what you did not sow." And he said to him, "Out of your own mouth will I condemn you, wicked slave. You knew that I am a austere man, taking up what I did not lay down, and reaping what I did not sow. Wherefore then did you not give my money into the bank, that at my coming I might have required it with interest?" Of course, taking interest is forbidden Old and New Testament, and pretty much every religion actually condemns taking any percent of profit for a loan. You can mutually invest or something, but you can't, charge a percentage or or whatever, yearly or at all, or a fee for, well, you loan me this, and oh, okay, there's a loan fee. It's like, no. And he said to those who stood by, take from him the mina, and give it to him who has 10 mina. And they said to him, Lord, he has 10 mina. I say that to every one who hath shall be given, and from him who hath not, even what he has shall be taken away. But mine enemies, those who would not that I should reign over them, bring hither and slay them before me. And see, that verse right there, is it saying where it is? Is it in Luke 19, or where is it? That verse has been used as part of the reason why Christianity has been responsible for more murders and more oppression than every other faith group combined. Sure, the secular governments have done 10 times that in the past 2,000 years. But, well, Christianity has been around 2,000 years, but just, more like 1900 or something. But Christians aren't the only ones who say Jesus is Lord. The Muslims consider Jesus to be Lord, but not in the Christian way. So therefore, they've, to this day, not sanctioned, but even in my country, people are killed for worshiping God and accepting Jesus as a literal Messiah. This parable is very far from being identical with that of the talents, as we shall see when we come to study the latter. So see, he wasn't allowing interest, it was just drawing a point that a writer professing to discharge the functions of criticism should see in this an awkward amalgamation of two other parables, namely of the talents and of the unfaithful husbandman, is a conspicuous display of the power of a preconceived theory over critical acumen. Strauss's Life of Jesus, 1-351. The parables have a few things in common, but the points of instruction are totally different. Here Jesus is surrounded by two classes of persons. One, a multitude representing the Jewish people, and the other, his little band of disciples. This parable of the pounds is intended to teach a lesson to both, as both were more or less looking for the setting up of a kingdom which should overthrow Rome. The formal portion of the parable is taken from the then well-known circumstances in the career of Archelaus, the son of Herod the Great. Jesus distinguishes between the servants of the king and the rebellious subjects of the kingdom, and has a lesson for each. The latter will reject their king. The Jews will reject Jesus for their spiritual, as they have rejected Archelaus for their civil sovereign. The result of their destruction and the establishment of Jesus in his kingdom, he meant to tell them that so far as the setting up of a kingdom of temporal power, he was to be rejected by them, but that this rejection would not harm him, but would destroy the Jewish nation, which very soon subsequently proved to be true in history. He intimated also that his was to be a reign of spiritual influence, and therefore instead of putting arms into the hands of his servants, he gave them small properties, which they were to use, calmly working, negotiating, and trading until the Lord should come. Such conduct on their part would be the best possible protest against the rebellious subjects, because it would show that these servants had such perfect faith in the return of their master and king that they quietly persisted in trade, so as to have accomplished all that was possible before his return. He taught his disciples that they who had the faith, the industry, and the endurance to do this should receive a reward proportionate to their success, but out of all proportion to the small sum put in their hands to trade with. If we understand even the etic mina as the money here designated, the sum did not exceed $15 in gold, equal in its purchasing capabilities, and that aged to many times $15 this day, but still being only 1/60th of a talent. That made it tenfold, was created ruler over 10 cities, and that he made it fivefold over 5 cities. As John Gerlach well says, 10 mina would scarcely purchase a home, and the superabundant recompense of grace is 10 cities. And remember that if you look at some of the pricings of stuff from around, the 1880s when this was brought, think of like 50 cents being, 10, like $20, $30 of purchasing power in current thinking. This interpretation is consistent with the whole narrative and with the circumstances under which it was uttered, and the state of mind to those whom it was addressed. As far as is practicable, it corrected all their misapprehensions before their arrival in Jerusalem. And so you can say that, compare that, like think of like $10,000, $20,000 of purchasing power for the one, and how much? And like 50 or 100 for another, and 100,000 or 200,000 worth of purchasing power, because you look at the price of a small home and that sort of stuff. Then you understand the level of investment and perhaps multiplication of wealth that would have been expected. The Passover was approaching. Many had gone up from the country to Jerusalem to make ceremonial purification for the great festival. These persons hoped to find the marvelous teacher in the holy city. They made inquiry among themselves, saying, "What think you, that he will not come up to the feast?" The special form of the inquiry is recorded by John, who states as a reason for it that the church authorities, ecclesiastical, had given directions that if any should discover where Jesus was, information should be given at once, that the church might seize him. Again, there were Jews that sort of worshiped prophets and angels and stuff, but as a rule, they didn't worship heroes, and the following we're saying Bethany, Friday 31st of March and Saturday 1st of April in the year 30, Matthew 26, Mark 14, and John 12, verse 1. 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany. This note of time assists us in adjusting the chronological connection of events. It is not fixed with precision the exact day of the arrival in Bethany. That will depend upon the mode of calculation of each reckoner. See Andrews, page 396 to 398. Why is the Bible not precise, a little crooked, as people would say, if it's supposed to be inspired of God or revealed or whatever? The 6 days may include both the Passover and the day of arrival, or include the former and exclude the latter, or include the latter and exclude the former, or exclude both. Robinson, including both days, makes his arrival on Saturday. Strong, by the same computation, fixes it on Sunday. Robinson, putting the Passover on Thursday, and Strong on Friday. Creswell agrees with Robinson and Uthardit with Strong, but reach these several conclusions by other process, as the language of Moses is in The 14th day of the first month at even is the Lord's Passover. Leviticus 23:5. The first month is Nisan, and 6 days before the 14th must have been on the 8th of Nisan. But when did the 14th Nisan fall? On Thursday or Friday? In this case, my opinion agrees with that of the great majority of reckoners in fixing the Passover on Thursday, and not including the Passover, the date of the arrival, will be Friday. And one of the things that we can look at is that biblically the month starts with the sighting of the waxing moon. Not the new moon circle, the waxing moon crescent. And this was not something to be calculated. And nowadays, a few hundred years before this, they could calculate it within half a second or something like that, when new moon to new moon would be. But that just tells you where in the sky it is, and if it's actually a new moon crescent that they sight. But the side it's on and the shape, that would tell you also if it's authentic. The correctness of this conclusion is favored by the consideration that Jesus would not unnecessarily travel 15 miles from Jericho to Bethany on the Sabbath, nor is it possible that he journeyed part of the way on Friday and then finished the journey after sunset of Saturday. The Sabbath, as between the two towns, was a wilderness with no stopping place, and the road is exceedingly bad. And moreover, he was with a cavalcade of pilgrims pushing towards the holy city. It would seem that he probably reached Jericho in the evening of Thursday, the 7th of Nisan, the 30th of March, remained all night with Zacchaeus, made the whole journey to Bethany, and the next day, reaching the place that evening before the beginning of the Sabbath, he knew that it was to be a week of conflict and anguish, and he would naturally desire to be with his friends at Bethany, refreshing himself in their quiet home. It was soon reported in Jerusalem that Jesus was at the house of Lazarus. Great crowds began to stream out to the little village, which was less than a Sabbath day's journey from the city. Because a Sabbath day's journey would have been, just enough to attend a service, not 10 miles or whatever that a person could do otherwise. There was a double inducement. They might see Jesus, and at the same time gaze upon Lazarus, who had the strange experience of being raised from the dead. This combined attractiveness of Jesus and his friend Lazarus incensed the ecclesiastical authority, and an ecclesiastical council was held to compass the death of both, because Lazarus was living proof that Jesus possessed the strange power of raising the dead, and those who saw them both together believed on Jesus. It was decided to destroy both men after the Passover. They had not then calculated upon the assistance of Judas, whose cooperation hastened the consummation of their plans. Now, one of the early Gospels that didn't go, the Gospel of Judas and some other ones actually don't have Jesus crucified. And honestly, they couldn't tell Jesus apart, so it's just as likely they killed someone else, and then Jesus wasn't resurrected. He was just alive the whole time. The Sabbath, Saturday, April 1st, was spent in the quiet of the house of Lazarus, and it was the last Sabbath in the career of Jesus, and it was appropriate to spend it with the beloved family of Bethany. And one of the things that we have in the Goetia is a placement of Semigina, or Gamikin, as the 4th, to align with this day. It would have aligned with about the 8th of April, wouldn't it have? that would have been included. So that could be the reason why some of those features of Samagina are stated.